Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring something totally fascinating: how that uncomfortable, kind of terrible feeling of having your entire worldview shattered is actually the ultimate catalyst for deep learning. We usually think of learning as this smooth, steady accumulation of facts, right? But as we're going to see, the most profound breakthroughs usually start with a profound sense of conflict.
I want you to think back to a time when your core beliefs were completely challenged. It's really not a pleasant feeling at all, is it? Well, today we are intertwining an ancient mythological journey from the Tantric texts with a peer-reviewed 2024 educational psychology study. And we're doing this to uncover the exact mechanics of how we truly change our minds. The parallels between these two wildly different sources are just striking, and they reveal something incredibly fundamental about human cognition.
To ground our exploration, we've got to start right here with cognitive dissonance. First defined by psychologist Leon Festinger back in 1957, it's that deeply uncomfortable feeling you get when new information violently contradicts what you already know to be true. We're not just talking about mild confusion here, it's a literal state of psychological tension. It's like an itch you can't scratch until you either completely reject the new information or fundamentally alter your entire belief system. Section 1, an ancient case study, the sage Vashishta.
To really understand this discomfort, let's look at Vashishta. According to Hindu texts, he was this highly disciplined ancient sage, right? A strict master of Vedic ritual who played completely by the rules. But despite spending absolute ages practicing severe austerities, he still fails to achieve his ultimate spiritual goal. So, totally frustrated, he's instructed by the goddess to travel to Mahasina, an area near Tibet, to learn a completely foreign practice called Sinakara, all to finally achieve his breakthrough.
Now you've got to pay attention to his visceral reaction here. He literally says, "This Akara is opposed to Veda. I do not approve of it." Because upon arriving and seeing revered sages and even an incarnation of Vishnu consuming wine and meat, which are strictly forbidden in his tradition, Bashishta experiences a textbook, literal crisis of cognitive dissonance. He immediately rejects it, stating clearly that it goes against everything he knows to be true and pure. He is experiencing some intense psychological tension.
And this brilliantly illustrates the intense cognitive conflict happening in his mind. On one hand, you have the rigid purity and austerity of his ordinary Vedic rituals, and then on the other hand, the seemingly rule-breaking, highly sensory Sinachara practices he's witnessing. His existing mental framework just cannot accommodate this new reality, especially since it's being practiced by enlightened beings. His brain is essentially short-circuiting, demanding some sort of resolution to this massive contradiction.
Section 2, the science of discomfort. So how does this ancient psychological collision build a framework for us today? Well, there's this fascinating 2024 study published in Migration Letters that actually investigated how this exact type of dissonance can be used intentionally by educators. The researchers wanted to see if they could use cognitive dissonance as a deliberate tool for conceptual change in students. Instead of just telling a student they're wrong, what happens if you force them to confront the inconsistency themselves? The crucial takeaway here is all in the data. When students were presented with information that totally contradicted their deeply held misconceptions, 68% felt initial discomfort and 45% felt frustration. I mean, they felt exactly like our ancient sage Vasista, just, without the Himalayan backdrop. But notice how a massive 80% experienced curiosity. This proves that the negative feelings associated with having your worldview shattered can actually trigger a sustained, really powerful desire to learn and resolve that conflict. And the hard data absolutely backs this up. The experimental group, so the students who are intentionally subjected to these cognitive dissonance interventions, scored an incredible 82% on their post-tests. Compare that to just 65% for the traditional control group that received standard instruction. That is a massive difference, proving that this discomfort is highly effective for long-term retention and understanding. Section 3, resolving intellectual conflict. But how exactly do we transition from frustrating discomfort to an 82% success rate, or, in Vashishta's case, to literal enlightenment? Because as the study noted, 22% of students did experience resistance to change. Dissonance alone just isn't enough. The answer is guided resolution. Just as modern students need scaffolding, reflective questioning, and peer discussion to get over that initial resistance, Vashishta required direct guidance. He got it from Buddha, who is an incarnation of Vishnu in this specific text, who explained that true purity is actually a mental state, not just an outward physical ritual. He basically helped Vashishta reframe the contradictory information so it finally clicked. As Buddha told him, "By practicing it, thou shalt not again sink into the ocean of being."
By actively practicing what initially horrified him, but doing so under guided, expert instruction, Vasistha completely reconstructed his worldview. He resolved the dissonance not by just rejecting the new information, but by expanding his understanding to actually accommodate it. And in educational psychology, this is exactly what Posner's modern model calls meaningful conceptual change.
Section 4. Designing modern classrooms. So, how do we take these profound lessons and build better learning environments using the power of cognitive conflict? Well, the research is incredibly clear here. When educators intentionally construct lessons that directly conflict with students' faulty pre-existing ideas, using things like discrepant events or counterintuitive demonstrations, the conceptual improvements are staggering across the board. The results across different subjects are wonderfully consistent. Whether students are unlearning flawed intuitive ideas about Newton's laws of motion or trying to grasp the scientific difference between heat and temperature, they consistently saw a 34% to 36% improvement in accuracy. This happens when their initial assumptions are forcefully disrupted and then expertly guided toward resolution. It literally works across completely diverse scientific disciplines.
So this means educators have a clear blueprint. We have to boldly design tasks that trigger cognitive conflict. We need to introduce counterintuitive demonstrations and encourage deep reflection to help process all that confusion. But most importantly, we've got to build emotional resilience. We need to teach learners that feeling frustrated because you're wrong isn't a failure. It is a vital, completely normal part of developing a growth mindset.
Ultimately, this explainer brings us to one undeniable conclusion. Whether you're an ancient mystic high in the Himalayas struggling with foreign rituals, or a student in a modern physics lab staring at a failed experiment, the discomfort of being wrong just isn't an obstacle to your education. It is, in fact, the very doorway to your enlightenment. So the next time you encounter an idea that makes you deeply uncomfortable, will you retreat into old habits, or will you use that dissonance to completely change your mind? Thanks for joining me on this journey today.